part of my McGann Audios overview basically consists of everything else that 8 has appeared in, as there's a ton of stuff on the side, and if I've missed anything, please don't point it out because these videos take fucking ages.
La la la, I am not listening, la la la.
Anyway, I couldn't be asked to try and place the following releases into continuity as I was going through with these videos because, seriously, fuck continuity. Okay, call sacrilege on that sentiment all you want, but sometimes if it's that needlessly obtuse, then my opinion is just, why bother? You're going to have to start making some compromises for me one day, continuity. If you want me to bother with you at all, you have to at least start making some effort to be user-friendly. Anyway, let's start with Klein's story. This is a bit of a weird one with a very long backstory, and I will definitely spoil shit. You have been warned. So I'll give you the short version. The 7th Doctor and Ace go to Colditz Castle during World War II, where Ace accidentally leaves her Walkman there, which contains a material the Nazis could use to win the war. The Doctor stops them getting it, but an alternate timeline is created where the Nazis won the war and built their Third Reich. But when the timeline gets derailed, high-ranking Nazi scientist Dr. Elizabeth Klein still remembers, and she winds up in South Africa where she runs into Seven again in an awesome story called 1,000 Tiny Wings, which I totally recommend while I'm here. And the Doctor takes Klein with him to show her the universe and try and dissuade her of her Nazi views. As a lead into the next story, Survival of the Fittest, she tells the Doctor the story of how the Doctor from her timeline was killed, and she used his TARDIS for her experiments to allow the Third Reich access to time travel. And she's aided by a mysterious man called Jonathan Schmidt, played by Paul McGann. Yes, Klein's story is a well-structured 25-minute piece, it's really atmospheric and engaging, but there's one big problem though. Can you guess what the twist is? Yeah, having McGann's actual voice in there, we the audience kind of know precisely how this story's going to end throughout the runtime. I mean, it always was kind of obvious anyway, but even more so when his voice is actually in there. It's good, yes, but for that reason, you are kind of just spending the runtime waiting around for the reveal. Anyway, next up, The Elixir of Doom. Right, so because the cover designer of this story either didn't actually listen to it before production on the CD, or Bigfinish just wanted to confuse people, 8's actually the Doctor that's featured in this kind of subpar Companion Chronicles release, which is a rarity for such an awesome series. For those unfamiliar with her, Iris Wildtime, who features in this one, is possibly a time lady, possibly not. She does say a lot of contradictory things on that front. She denies being a time lady in this one, but it's been implied she is elsewhere. She's played by Katie Manning, and she's a bit of a dodgy lady with a strong tendency to talk shite, who appears in her own series, and a ton of Doctor Who spin-offs, and she basically acts as a parody of the Doctor. A renegade time traveller as well, but she's incredibly unreliable, doesn't exactly hold temporal continuity in high regard, she fucks up a lot and gets drunk all the time, her TARDIS takes the form of a double-decker bus, the interior of which is mostly like an actual bus, and her travelling companions have included a talking panda called Panda. She met up with a present-day version of Jo in an earlier Companion Chronicles release, and the two went on a couple of adventures together. I am really impressed with Katie Manning's ability to have quite coherent conversations with herself, which don't actually sound like conversations with herself. As said though, Elixir of Doom's not that notable. We basically spend the entire first half where Jo and Iris find themselves at a movie star party during the golden age of Hollywood, where they run into the 8th Doctor, and Iris basically spends the entire first half rattling off a series of anecdotes before the plot finally shows up. A sadistic Hollywood starlet has been forcing real lizard monsters, and something called the human jelly, to appear in her monster movies. And while yes, I agree that revealing that the movie monsters are actually monsters sounds like a very Doctor Who-ish thing, and could make for a good episode, but given how this one's set up, I still don't really get why the Doctor was even necessary. Jo and Iris would have been perfectly capable of carrying something like this on their own, and even then, while Elixir of Doom's jolly and has lots of bouncy and upbeat dialogue, a pretty large proportion of it just felt like padding to me, and I didn't really feel it made good use of the assets at its disposal. And I just think there are much funnier Iris releases elsewhere. Anyway, next up, The Short Trips. For about half a decade, Bigfinish used to do these short story collections written by a vast array of already established names in Doctor Who, and some newcomers as well, as a way of easing them into the franchise. They were usually centred around one specific theme per book, until they lost the licence to print them. So they relaunched it not long after the print ones ended as a series of audiobooks which are pretty off and on, but when they're on, they can be so good. And if you are particularly enthusiastic about stuff like Heaven Sent, I'd highly recommend the short trips. They're small self-contained ideas with a big emphasis on theme. They usually concern themselves with the effects of time travel, or sometimes they can be very meta pieces about the audience's relationship with Doctor Who. While they are patchy and for a very specific type of Whovian, I just found myself enthralled by these things. There's this one about the Doctor giving this kid the formula for time travel, and the kid ends up breaking the entire history of humanity. There's this one where Nyssa accidentally turns the TARDIS into a whale. While I found the short trips audio collection suffered a bit from lacking an overall encompassing theme that the books had, the stories in each of the collections share some elements, but overall they're a bit scattered and unfocused. They're pretty much just 8 stories featuring a different Doctor in each, read by someone who played one of the companions or the Doctor in each era. I feel the series makes a bit more sense now that they're released as cheap monthly half-an-hour stories to add to your basket when you're shopping for new releases. But if you're a pretentious neckbeard, I'd highly recommend checking this series out. It won't cost you much, and you'll find some of the most daring and challenging, occasionally abstract Doctor Who stories ever written, living a law unto themselves. I guess I love these ones so much because I found myself becoming much more drawn to short story collections in recent times over novels, for which I thank Rob Shearman. Because when short stories are good, as Rob Shearman's always are, go buy them, they're tight but they don't feel compacted and basically have to encompass everything that they want to express about an interesting theme in a way that doesn't feel like it wastes any time. And that's what the best of these short trips collections do. A common element in the 8th Doctor ones is telling the story either considering or from the perspective of a character in Doctor Who you rarely get the perspective of. Conventional Doctor Who is usually about the Doctor and the assistant and how they impact on people's lives, but the short trips all apply this method of alternate perspectives to different types of Doctor Who stories. And while the 8th Doctor ones are rarely my favourites, which is weird because 8's one of my favourite Doctors, and they're read by India Fisher, who's a fantastic narrator, and I'll pretty much buy anything with her name attached, but before I go into what I'm here for, I'll just say the best short trip is the first Doctor one, Rise and Fall, which you can actually get for free on Bigfinish's SoundCloud, and so therefore you have absolutely no excuse for not doing so. I'll probably end up putting Rise and Fall on another Big Finish recommendations list at some stage because it's just absolutely breathtaking and demonstrates everything I love about the short story as a form of fiction, and it does everything that I'm always asking Doctor Who to do. It's just an absolutely beautiful and amazing hidden gem, and it totally bowled me over and I love it to bits, but that's another video. The first 8th Doctor one is called Running Out of Time, which is about some guy in a cafe somewhere who's got amnesia, where he meets the Doctor and the Doctor helps him remember who he was. I ultimately thought there was a bit too much exposition in this one for a short story. Pretty much all of the action happens in the second half, and the first half is mostly spent painting a picture, very pretty picture, of some cafe somewhere with words. It just seemed to me that the writer of this one was more in a novel mindset than a short story one when writing it. While the formats appear to be similar, in a short story, if any element of it doesn't absolutely need to be there, cutting it out is vital to the experience. The second one's called Letting Go, and it's by Simon Guerrier, who's one of my Big Finish favourites, and it's a really good one. Charlie and 8 go and see the grieving family of an alien who died during one of their let's save everybody from dying except the odd character here and there adventures, and it's just fucking intense. A lot of people that champion Russell's human and down-to-earth approach to New Who will often say that you kind of need more humans in the show because alien civilizations will feel a bit sterile and unrelatable purely because of their nature of being weird and alien. But while yes, the family that we see in Letting Go is very weird and alien and totally unlike a human family, there's just something very warm and familiar about them that I feel undermines the aforementioned argument. And Letting Go packs a real gut punch towards the end. Highly recommend it. Collection 3 is probably my least favourite one. The 8th Doctor one is called All the Fun of the Fair, and it's a first-person piece by a con man who's stolen the TARDIS and set it up as a funfair attraction. Only no one that goes into his attraction comes out again, as when they wander inside they get sent into the future. And this of course attracts the attention of the police. And the story notably sees India Fisher doing a Cockney accent, which feels kind of wrong for some reason. I mean, don't get me wrong, she's good, she sounds heavily invested in this character, she's always very professional as a narrator, but speaking as someone who's very used to her regular voice, it's kind of an odd listen. There were some logical problems with all the fun of the fair, but you can kind of wave them away with the excuse of the unreliable narrator, as said narrator is explicably thick. Quantum Heresy is the last in the CD collections, and it's a really good one. A time-sensitive lady is working in an archive, but she's caught in a time loop where she repeats the same day and the same job over and over again, while the ghost of an old man watches over her, when the Doctor, also time-sensitive, shows up, and they both have to break out of the time loop. Basically, imagine Chimes of Midnight told from Edith's point of view. A kind of creepy and unsettling character from a bizarre version of reality that the Doctor's caught in, who breaks out of the cycle of events. It's short, sweet, incredibly tight, and beautifully written. Highly recommend this one. Foreshadowing is one of the more recent ones, and it writes a traditional base under siege type story from the perspective of the authority figure, coming in and asking the Doctor to explain himself, and naturally it sounds like absolute horseshit. Charlie and the Doctor have broken into a top-secret military base in search of a time roach which has sucked the time stream out of an officer and made him physically regress to a 5-year-old. It's pretty funny. It's one of those short stories that tries to operate as an extended joke where it starts with its characters saying something ridiculous and it gets incrementally more ridiculous as the story goes on. Sort of like a tasteful Doctor Who version of the Aristocrats joke. You know, formula-wise, and oh my god, I'm getting some gross mental images right now. The ending reveal of Foreshadowing is a bit fan-wanky. Well, actually, no, very fan-wanky, but it's a nice little experiment, I guess. The latest one that came out this month, and was the reason that I held off on this video, is Curse of the Fugue, and it's Sheridan Smith's first Bigfinish release since she left in 2011, and all of a sudden became a household name among British TV viewers with a lot of high-profile work. Lucy is stuck working in a retirement home in the 1970s, a time of regular strikes and power cuts, while the Doctor is off doing a space thing, where she comes across an old lady who appears to be pretty lucid, but she's hiding a lot of secrets from back when she worked with the Secret Service during World War II, and she's being haunted by visions and ghosts of people that she worked with in the Second World War. And the Doctor shows up as he's tracking down an alien alloy that can be used to manipulate people's minds. While I enjoyed Curse of the Fugue's plot, and I like the themes that it's dealing with the lady being haunted by a past trauma that's playing on her mind and made to feel even more visceral by the presence of the device, but I did feel that it took like the first 5 minutes or so to feel like Sheridan Smith's really got comfortable as a narrator. She does kind of feel a bit out of place delivering long streams of prose. The story starts to morph into a bit more of a dialogue piece after our setup though, where she feels a lot more at home. This one was a bit of an odd choice though, because the EDAs mostly were written inside a jokey and light-hearted stylistic framework, hence you had Sheridan Smith as a companion at all. And the short trips are mostly about mood and atmosphere, and Curse of the Fugue, with the themes it's trying to deal with, feels very disconnected from that. Not to say that's a bad thing, of course, but if you've just come off the back of listening to Sheridan with 8 in the EDAs, it is very far removed from what they were doing with her back then. Enemy Aliens is 8's part of the Destiny of the Doctor range that Bigfinish did with the now-defunct Audio Go for the 50th anniversary. They're essentially like their Companion Chronicles plays. Essentially, these are Doctor Who adventures narrated by a companion who's recounting the events, with some sound effects and stuff. I've only heard Enemy Aliens for completion's sake, so I'm definitely missing something and may return at some stage, cause apparently Destiny of the Doctor is one whole interconnected story, where the 11th Doctor contacts his past selves to help him do a time thing. Which rings a bell. So the Doctor is sent a cryptic message by his future incarnation, presenting him with a mystery which evolves into a conspiracy to unravel in 1930s London, starting with an assassination at a psychic show, into a chase across the country involving two-faced duplicitous characters and secret agents who are either aiding or trying to prevent an alien invasion, where the Doctor and Charlie stumble into scenarios that they're not quite sure of the validity of, leading up to a showdown at a BBC radio broadcast. It's sort of like a sci-fi tinged version of a mid-period Hitchcock film, a cross-country adventure that tries to keep you second-guessing as every bit of the mystery unravels. As said, I'm probably missing something owing to Destiny of the Doctor being essentially a 13-part serial where we hop between different Doctors in different stories, but it's as enjoyable as most of the Big Finish companion chronicles. I did think it was a bit long-winded all told though, and it was kind of lacking in the innovative narrative hook that drives most of the Big Finish companion chronicles. And finally, that one, The Light at the End, the Big Finish 50th anniversary of the show release, which far from being another 8th Doctor play, he's in it, but... well, I've no clue how Briggs did it, but he did manage to write a 2-hour play with the first 8 Doctors, with stand-ins for Hartnell, Troughton and Pertwee in a very conciliatory manner, of course, and most of the companions, and they all have speaking parts, and at the very least do something. It is an impressive achievement. Basically, all of the Doctors in their own timelines find a light blinking on the TARDIS console that wasn't there before, warning that the barriers of time are being ripped apart. I wonder who is responsible? Let us spin the wheel of the 3 monsters that big finale type stories usually deal with. Ooh, it's the Master! Wow, what were the chances of that happening? Anyway, said events impact on the life of innocent bystander Bob Dovey, and so the Doctors have to fix the timelines and the life of the traumatised innocent bystander who's been fucked about with by the Master, as they sort of muddle across war-torn alien landscapes, different Doctors' timelines, and an artificial dimension. Now, while I thought Light at the End was entertaining, if you're a fan of the Doctor interacting with his past selves, it's basically a dream come true, but guys, I've got to say it, it's got way too much going on. As much as we've all talked up this idea of bringing together all of the Doctors and all of the companions in one big celebratory story, that is way too many characters to have in a 2-hour space. And whoever you got to write it and whatever you do, the result will almost always feel like a fan wank first and an interesting story second. Okay, 5 Doctors being as good as it was kind of disproves this point, but there are exceptions to every rule. I mean, I understand all the Doctors and most of the living companions in 2 hours is a big ask, but 6 and 7 in particular don't exactly have that much to do. Tom Baker's given most of the amount of runtime, and yes, I love Tom Baker as much as the next Who nerd. He's wonderful and a national treasure. But there is such a thing as sidelining everyone else because everyone wants to stare at the light shining out of the 4th Doctor's arse. To its credit though, I wouldn't call Light at the End a fan wank and just that in totality. Yes, fan service is the primary directive for it, as it always would be, but I would call it more of a crowd pleaser than a fan wank, which is kind of just a nicer synonym for fan wank, but... okay, help me here, comments. Is one just a nicer synonym for the other, or are they two different things? Light at the End was as good a result as I would have expected of trying to pull off Doctors 1 through 8 all coming together in one plot, and since Big Finish had all of the living ones and decent stand-ins for 1 to 3 and most of the living companions at their disposal at the time, I would have thought there was something desperately wrong with them if they hadn't at least decided to attempt it. And there are some great little parts of the overall plot that stand out. There was the occasional bit of Douglas Adams-ish humour that I really liked, and it was great hearing Paul McGann and India Fisher back together again. Briefly. But the overall result to me is just sort of alright. The story's just really scattergun, which given the mammoth cast list was always going to happen. Like I said back when I talked about An Earthly Child, fans' dream episodes are never likely to be as good as you'd think because... well, I just said it. Fans' dream episodes. They're always going to be what you would expect by definition, and the best Doctor Who works on taking you by surprise, and fans' dream episodes by and large won't really do that. Which is the primary flaw with just the idea of Light at the End, let alone the actual story itself. While it was a smart move to do something like this in 2013 in particular, as the company was getting a lot more attention than back when they released Zagreus, and many newcomers to Big Finish will probably look at this release early on in their exploration of it and go, ooh, that looks pretty. So it was a smarter idea to do something more like the 5 Doctors, rather than trying something as batfuck as Zagreus again. But the what you would expect nature of Light at the End was always going to be the big problem with this one. Again, don't get me wrong, I did enjoy it, but that flaw is always going to be the thing that it's hard to argue round.